Hello, everybody. It's a rainy day here in New York, and my plans for the day got changed, so I thought I would just draw. It's always a good thing to do when you don't know what else to do. So I started doing this drawing, and I thought, well, why not just record it, and I'll share it with all of you. So relatively simple topic, but I think it'd be a good springboard just to talk about some basics of drawing, shading, perspective construction, and that sort of thing. So this is a reference photo, obviously, but it's where we are is Rome, Italy. This is, excuse me, a little garden temple in the Borghese gardens. Very beautiful neoclassical structure and very, very beautiful gardens, of course, if you've ever been. Why I like it as a topic for a painting or a drawing is it has all those elements that I'm always looking for, which is essentially contrast. And by that, I don't just mean light versus dark, although I do, but also the collision of two opposite things meeting on the paper. So that could be light and dark. It could be warm and cool tones. It could be vertical versus horizontal energy. It could be man-made versus the environmental or atmospheric conditions. Any two opposite things really attract me as a topic for making art of any sort. Because they have to meet on the surface of the paper and find some kind of resolution. So this has a lot of that going on in a, otherwise very, I think, appealing, beautiful setting. But there's a little bit of tension and a little bit of resolution that I think is needed. And yeah, anyway, I'll just jump in. This could easily be a painting, but I want to approach it today just as a drawing, just as an exercise in tonalities, darks, midtones, lights, as I approach all of my work. And I'm going to just talk about some basics. Paper I'm using is watercolor paper, Saunders Waterford. It's a rough surface, but it's not especially rough. It does have a distinctive texture, but it's not quite as bumpy as Arches Rough or Bow Hung that I love to paint on. People ask why I like to draw on watercolor paper, and often it's just because that's all I've got lying around. But I do like the texture. I think the same kind of effects you can achieve in watercolor, the luminosity, the merging of tonalities on the rough surface paper is easier to achieve for me than on a smoother surface. In drawing, sometimes I like the very gritty paper. For this subject, I wanted a little bit more resolution, so I wanted something a little less textural. So that's why I chose the Saunders. Okay. As always, I started off with the horizon line. This isn't going to be a formal lesson in perspective, although we're certainly going to be dealing with it. So I always draw the horizon line first. It establishes my dominant horizontal. It's the datum line between about which all visual information radiates. Visual information above and below. It bisects your point of view. It isn't the bottom where everything ends. It's your eye line. I'm going to be using a range of pencils today. These are, for lack of a better term, mechanical pencils, but they're not really. They're not fixed leads. They're loose leads. I've used these in all my years as an architect and architectural artist. They're great because you can exchange the leads in them from very hard to very soft, whatever you want to use. But they're a bit thinner lead than typical sketch pencils, so they're a little better for just doing layouts perhaps, or detail work. When I get into the more toning, I'll be using these as well, my beloved Blackwing 602s, fairly soft, made by Blackwing, great pencils. You can do toning with these too if they're not too hard. The leads I'm using are an HB in that pencil and an H in this, so a little harder, so therefore a little less dark. I'll use the slightly harder lead just to sketch in the basics here. For a pointer, oh gosh, I'm such a dinosaur. This thing I have had for, well, forever. It's a mechanical pointer, very analog. Has sort of a circular, rough piece of sandpaper inside. I don't even know if you can still buy these, but probably you can. I have had that, gosh, I think it's older than I am. Belonged to my grandfather, I believe. Anyway, I've had it my whole life. So the horizon line in the photograph is right here where I'm standing across the body of water, across the pond, looking across, and right where the people's eyes are, more or less, at the top of this small fence. That's the horizon line. So that will be a perfectly horizontal line, oddly enough, right through your whole drawing. And the temple that you see here is in a nice, fairly standard, comfortable, believable two-point perspective. I do want to play up the water because I want to play up the reflectivity, showing the visual and sort of emotional connection between water and earth and humans and their environment. I don't feel any real need to be utterly faithful to exactly what this thing looks like. I want to be respectful and get it fairly close, but for example, there's a security fence that I'll edit out. I'll probably change up some of these rocks. When I get into the background, I'm definitely going to be doing a little bit of redesign there, but as far as the foreground, I really just want to simplify some of the visual information elements seen. I do like this rock embarcadero here. It just anchors the architectural elements nicely, and will be a good element to reflect a bit in the water. And again, I'm doing it not because it's really there, but because I think it'll make the drawing more interesting to include it a bit. You don't always have to be so explicit about your reflections, but I do want these to be a considered and a little bit more dominant piece of the composition, so I'm going to be a little bit more deliberate about them. These are ionic columns for you history nerds, if you're interested. Derived from the original Greek orders. There's the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian are the three basic orders of columns. And they each had a very distinctive decorative style. The Ionic had this beautiful scroll top on them that's so characteristic and beautiful. The Doric was the simplest order. It had really no decoration on top. And the Corinthian was a little bit more elaborate and carried over more into the neoclassical and Renaissance. I did a couple of tick marks earlier just to sort of locate visual information, but I think I've made the columns a little bit too tall, so I'm going to lower them down a bit. This is a two-point perspective, meaning anything you see, such as this built object, but it holds true for trees, atmosphere, people, anything at all. You're going to see both sides, two sides at once of an object rather than looking straight on it, which would be a more standard or a more static one point. This is a 2 point, so you're going to see a little bit of both sides of this temple, and that means the visual lines will appear to slope away to the horizon, bisected by the corner of that object which is closest to us, which is here. To the left of that, things will slope down to the horizon, to the right, sloping down the other direction. But again, I'm not going to get into a really deep or complicated perspective lesson for today. Just referencing that. Those lines will vanish on these not imaginary, but invisible lines down toward the horizon, and the vanishing points, the points at which everything seems to literally vanish, will be on the horizon always. Am I locating the vanishing points? I am not. I'm just sketching this, so I'm just going to estimate it, knowing that they're out there somewhere. I am giving a little bit more perspective to the left side of this. As you can probably see, it's slightly more angled just to make it a little bit more hopefully interesting. I love drawing. Anybody who follows my work or studies with me knows that. It's not only that I love it, but for me, it's integral to everything I do in painting and in mark making overall. It's everything. I even think, in a sort of a broad sense, my watercolor paintings are a kind of a drawing. Rather than describing elements with lines, though, as drawing is more known for. In painting, of course, you're working more with shapes of tone and value. Drawing often starts out with a line, but it isn't just reliant on describing anything with a line. It's, well, you'll see soon, but you can use tonal expressions, the whole dark to light value scale. Definitely I will be using that. So I'm not just dependent on lines. There's a lot of tonal work that goes on in my drawing, at least, as well. To begin, however, I'm not trying to outline things, but I'm just trying to locate approximately where they really are. By describing things with lines in here in the early stages. I'm asked a lot, how do you draw a straight line without using straight edges? One way is to draw a little bit less with your fingers, like that, and more with your whole arm. So if you start here and want to draw a relatively straight line, just pull your arm down the page. You can sometimes hook your finger on the edge of a paper if that's a possibility, and you can draw a pretty darn straight line pretty easily. Sorry, my voice is acting up. Also, you can think of drawing a little bit like archery in the sense that you don't look at the point of your pencil when you're drawing, you look at where you want the point of the pencil to go. Just as in archery, you don't look at the arrow so much, you look at the target where you want the arrow to go. That sounds a little philosophical, but it's true. I try to look ahead of the pencil line when I'm drawing so that I aim at a point in space rather than looking right at the pencil point, because if I do that, I'm much more likely to get a crooked or an inaccurate line. So another thing to do is just take a deep breath, draw a little faster in smooth marks, much like painting. A smooth mark with the brush is almost always desirable to that dabbing or dotting technique. So when you're drawing, rather than go like this, little dashes, just make a smoother line. More often than not, you're going to be happier with the result. This is a building that a lot of design order to it, meaning a lot of symmetry and accuracy. So have to be a little careful if you want it to look good, but also it is a sketch. It doesn't need to be 100% precise. So proportionally, I like where this is going. I think everything's all right. The pediment. I could just wing this and get it probably close enough. But if you're having a hard time finding the center in perspective of any shape, a way to do it is to draw a rectilinear shape describing the whole element. Do a very light X through, connecting top and bottom, top and bottom. And where that X crosses, that will form the center line in perspective. This half of that shape will be a little bit more condensed than this half because it's farther away, it's in perspective. So obviously it's going to appear a little bit more condensed, a little smaller than this half, which is closer to us. But in doing that, I can find the approximate center of the whole shape, then just connect the dots, and I'm going to have a triangular shape forming the pediment of the roof, which, if not 100% accurate, I think is going to be pretty darn close. From that basic framework, then you can go in and add as much detail or articulation as you think it really needs. Looks pretty good. All lines to the left of this closest corner, again, are going to recede to the right, sloping downward. Okay, so the big shapes of the temple are located and placed. The columns, obviously there's one on each corner. I don't know if any of you have studied classical architecture or drawing, but there's this quality to Greek architecture, in early Roman, but the Greeks invented it, of a column having this quality called entasis, which means it gets slightly narrower at the top than it is at the bottom. It makes the shape look a little bit more elegant. It also emphasizes the visual effect of perspective when you're looking up at something very tall. It's interesting, it's beautiful, but it makes it a bit of a challenge to draw because you can't just draw two perfectly straight lines if you want to draw a classical column. They go up, roughly speaking, perfectly vertical about a third of the way, and then they cant in ever so slightly until they reach the capital at the very top. back in my classical drawing days, I had a great deal of fun nerding out over trying to draw the classical orders perfectly and cast shades and shadows and all that stuff, which we did in those days. So yeah, there's no need to be absolutely pristinely perfect about these elements, but I want to be relatively faithful to them. One downside of drawing, especially on soft white paper, is your hand often gets in the way or causes trouble. Some trouble can be smudging some of the pencil work you've already done, but another is you can, without even knowing it, you can work oil from your skin or anything you have on your hands, God forbid, into the surface of the paper. So very easy workaround is just lay down a clean sheet of paper, rest your hand on it as you're drawing, and it just preserves a lot of what you've already done. I'm not all that careful often, not as careful as I should be, I confess. But once I get into the toning of this drawing, which I will soon, I do want to be pretty careful in that case that I don't smudge anything that I've already laboriously finished. So I've quickly tried to locate the 4 symmetrical columns. I didn't do any kind of measuring or I just implied the classic technique of winging it, hoping that they are close enough. If I were doing a large arcade with many, many columns that would recede into space, I would imply that X technique to locate the centers of the space and divvy it up proportionally. But in this case, it's a relatively small area, just the 4 columns. So I thought I could estimate it fairly accurately just by eye. And I don't know, let's see how I got on. I think I did okay, they look fine. Again, I want this to be a sketch, which means I want it to look a little bit informal and not too belabored. Okay, yeah, I don't want it to look overworked in any case, so I think it looks fine. The bases of these columns, there are bases. The Doric order, the simpler order, does not have a base on it. The round columns just sit directly on the plinth that's holding them up. But the more articulated orders, the Ionic and then the Corinthian, do have a base. They sit on a smaller little flat square plinth, and then they have rounded articulation at the base. Again, here I don't want to get too picky or too overly accurate, but I just want to indicate that that's happening. On the inside corners, there is a half column. It's not rounded, it's flat to the wall surface. Barely see it because of the trees that are coming, but I'll just lightly indicate it there in case some of it peeks out from behind. Same on that side. Then there is this large door into the temple itself that you do see behind the columns. Again, I don't think there's any real need to locate it absolutely perfectly. I'll just try to be relatively accurate. This whole presentation today is meant to be about as carefree and fun as drawing is, which I find it is fun. I love drawing. So what I don't want it to turn into is a belabored technical exercise in trying to be overly precise or overly perfect. I hate the phrase good enough, but maybe it holds true in this case. I think more accurately, I think whatever you are trying to do, be it a really finished drawing or painting or a looser, more expressive sketch in pencil or watercolor, your approach, your technique throughout should be consistent. So there is a bit of tightness just by definition because of what we're working with here, but I don't feel that it looks belabored or overly tight, and that's good. I do sort of like, as far as the topic of contrast too, the sort of classical order of the human-built object, the architecture, and then the nature-built architecture of the trees, the atmosphere, the water, the air itself. It's a really nice collision. It's very common. It's just something I always see. It's one reason I love Central Park here in New York, is because you can be surrounded by nature and then look up and see the ordered structural city beyond, and it's that somewhat unexpected, surprising clash that I find very, very compelling. It's appealing. Up here we have some sculptures on the roofscape. Again, I don't think it's necessary to get too absolutely accurate, but it appears we have some sort of angel on this side. Or else it's a human being with wings, which I doubt, so. That's going to be a saved so-called negative shape, meaning I'm going to draw in the trees behind it. Quite dark, relatively dark anyway, so that's going to be really an exercise on what I don't draw or don't tone. Very much similar to the way I approach watercolor painting. A lot of negative shape painting and a lot of the power of what you don't paint, as well as what you do paint. So internally, I'm trying to decide how much detail I want to apply on this temple. Sort of a balance between suggestion, editing out completely, adding in lightly. Not 100% sure yet. I don't want to overdraw it, but it is a pencil drawing, so you can erase, of course, with a little more ease than you can if you're painting. Speaking of erasers, I use these. They're mono erasers made by Tombow. They're white vinyl, very, very soft. They erase very completely without scratching the actual surface of the paper, which a harder eraser would definitely do. So I just recommend using very soft erasers always whenever you can. There are some steps going up to the temple. I'm not sure on the sides. I'm not sure how much you'll see them, but. And then there's this arched window here, but I really don't think you're going to see much of this because I'm reinventing these trees, I can tell, on the right side to form a pretty solid dark foreground. And I'm very likely going to plant another tree or two, which is, among other things, going to obscure whatever you see on the side. All right. This massive trees in the background. Again, I don't have to feel locked into being absolutely accurate, but the shape of them is what's needed. The darkness contrasting with the saved light of the temple itself is going to be the making of this drawing. So I want to think a little bit about the profile of this large mass of trees in the background. I like the angularity of it in the reference photo, so I'm going to play that up, and I think even exaggerate it a bit so it'll make this nice dark shape right down through the drawing. I should have said up front, I've gone with as you can see, a vertical composition for this drawing, which is different than the reference photo, which is more square. So I'm adding a bit of water, a little bit of real estate up in the sky, and I'm taking off a good bit, a little bit on the right, but a fairly good bit on the left side of the composition as it shows in the photo, and hoping I can make a more dynamic, appealing composition in the vertical. I did not do an initial study sketch of this. I just did not, in this case, think it required. I knew I wanted to go vertical. I could see in my mind that I wanted to push over some of this information, emphasize the connection between building, water, and sky. This dynamic would be dominant. Sky, trees, man-made elements, water. So nature, not nature, nature again. That's sort of the dominant energy in the painting. I'm not alone, but I love these, what we call these umbrella pines that you see throughout Rome. Not sure, I'm sure somebody out there knows what kind of trees these are. I've heard them referred to as stone pines. I don't know if that's a colloquial name or more technical, but they are very beautiful trees that grow up in this fluid vertical and have these umbrella shapes on top. This was another reference photo I had from somewhere else in Rome, and I'm going to use this a bit as a way to suggest, to enhance this one that shows in the reference photo and make a little bit more out of it. It's sort of another layer of visual information, actually, that I want to include. At this stage, I think I'm probably just going to let my pencil, when I start adding the tone, describe these trees more explicitly, so I don't feel a need to draw them too much or too accurately, but I know that I want them here. I think it'll add a really nice texture to the background, but also break up the mass of the sky and make, hopefully, a little bit more overall interesting drawing. I'm not drawing actual shapes of leaves or pine needles so much as I'm just trying to place compositionally where I want the pieces of these trees to fall. And I rather like that, so I think I'll live with that. I don't want to make too much out of it. I just really like this as an element. It's sort of a natural callback, if you will, to the efforts of humankind over here. This looks like a negative version of that umbrella pine in an odd way. The columns, the trunk of the tree, set up a nice dialogue. I could have edited it out, but I really liked that. I wanted to enhance, amplify it. So I've done 3 trees in the background here, or I'm going to do, sketch them in here to sort of recall the columns of the temple there. In the reference photo, there's framing the image, a very dark tree. I like it, but I think I can do a little bit better in terms of making it interesting. So I think rather than have it just shoot off the side of the page, I'm going to include at least one, probably two, or maybe just a thinner element to drop in the foreground, and these will be quite dark to frame out the right side of the painting, drawing. Yes, it pretty well covered over the arched window that you could see on that side, but I think it's no great loss for this drawing. I don't think that's really would have added all that much. There is sort of a foliage umbrella hanging over, which compositionally I think would be nice. I don't think I need to be literal to what this shows, but I do think I will work in a sense of dark overhanging trees here, probably coming down a bit over the edge of the temple here as well. What that's going to help do is just layer up values. Dark in the foreground, light in the midground, midtone in the background. Dark, light, midtone. Each value layered over the other will really help tell the story of the place, but also set up this illusion of depth. Background, midground, foreground, the three-dimensionality. It is something I pretty much always do in my paintings. Layering of values is, for me, one of the most, maybe the most, for me, effective way of establishing depth, the illusion of depth and dimensionality within my paintings, and telling the stories I want to tell. There are figures here in a little rowboat. It's a little sentimental, but it's nice. I have to just decide, do I think I need it for my composition, or could I edit it out? I think I do need it. I don't think I want to include it just because it's there, but I do think compositionally, some element here that I can save as light against the darker toned water behind it and the dark forest behind makes sense. I see this in my mind, and I probably should do a little value study, but again, I'm not sure it's needed. So I think the idea of a boat here is good. I think I might make it run off the page, similar to the way the temple runs off the page that direction. And just assess, there'll be a good deal of saved light here, bits here in the reflections, of course, and then just a little note over here, which I then think will set up a nice triad of lights against a triad of darks. That should compose everything out comfortably. I will add one solitary figure in the boat. I think that's going to be a little bit more evocative than showing a whole group of people. And again, I don't want to make too much of a big deal out of it, but I do think compositionally, it will be a necessary element. I don't want to too carefully etch in or draw these reflections, but again, compositionally, they're going to be pretty important. So I may just place them lightly here. Good. Almost all of my drawings, I do think of them as tonal exercises, very much like paintings, or I add values in. So what I'm doing now is essentially my layout sketch. Then I'm going to add tone to it. What I'm literally doing now is just adding a few light, almost guidelines, for lack of a better term, to try to keep the water nice and flat, horizontal feeling, so I don't get any wonky lines going up at strange angles. Just about ready for adding tone, but I want to just assess if anything else is needed. Here you can see there are tree trunks, fences, underbrush, stuff, none of which I think is terribly important. There is an old urn on a pedestal. Again, I'm a little unsure. I don't feel any need to add it because it's actually there, but I'm wondering if I should add it just as a compositional element, and I think I will do. So again, I'm not trying to be faithful to the photograph. I'm just trying to be faithful to my vision of the drawing I'm going to do. I think a little bit of saved white there will help flesh out this triad of lights. Light, 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 light. Should all tie together nicely. Some of you might be asking, well, what about the sky? Isn't it light too? It is in the reference photo, and it will be in my drawing, but not as light. I want to tone it out, sort of a softer gray, to keep all the real lights primarily here. So, okay, I've added this classical urn. I've made it a little bit bigger. In my drawing than it is in reality, just so that it can hold a little bit more light value. I don't know, I'm still not sure I absolutely need it, but there it is. So now I'm going to get my tonal pencils ready, and I'll be back in just a minute.